When I was growing up, I attended a Roman Catholic grade school. And at the beginning of every academic year, we would get a handout, all of the students. And the handout was a piece of cardboard that was perforated so you could fold it. And when you folded it in all the right places, the handout became a box that was in the shape of a church. And the front of the box had a small slit on it, like the kind you'd see on a piggy bank. And it had the words, "My offering," written on it. And the students were encouraged to use this cardboard box to collect spare coins, spare change, maybe some small bills that we would come across. And then once a month, all of the students would bring our boxes to the Sunday Mass, and we would bring them forward to the foot of the altar during the offertory. Our boxes that had our names and our room numbers, our homeroom numbers written on them, were returned to us later in the week, and then we started all over again for a new month. Now, in those days, it was also very common for children, including my brother and my sister and me, to fight over who got to put the offering envelope in the basket as it was being sent around in the church. Now, it's probably safe to say that most kids didn't have a whole lot of excess funds laying around, but we did have an occasional coin or two that maybe we found on the sidewalk somewhere. Or most of us had some kind of either a weekly or a monthly allowance of some kind. And we certainly used most of that allowance to pay for things like candy, or maybe the latest MC Hammer cassette tape, or the newest Game Boy game. But we were taught that even with those things, there was always a little bit more that we could spare for the benefit of others. And we were taught by the sisters that perhaps the newest Super Mario Land game could wait a week or two for us to buy, because that might allow us to put a couple extra quarters in our offering box. And if we gave those quarters to that box, then children in poorer areas of the world who had no idea who Super Mario was could have some food to eat. The sisters taught us that even a few dollars was enough in other parts of the world to provide food for a family of four for several days. Now, I'm not talking, of course, about a 7-course meal, but maybe some rice, some bread, some beans, sustenance, something that would keep people alive. And the children of the school celebrated each month, knowing that our collective offerings would feed and perhaps clothe children who were just like us. Super Mario Land 2 was not any less fun, even if it took us a couple extra weeks to buy our copy later than we maybe would have wanted. This was my first experience of learning about what we call in the church stewardship. And you know something? It made sense. It made sense. I didn't have much money of my own as a child, but what I had was enough for what I needed and mostly enough for what I wanted. But if I held off on something that I wanted for just a short time, I could offer maybe a little more of what I had to someone who needed it a little more than I did. And it was kind of a win-win. And it was presented to us as children like this. We were each given 10 pieces of candy to hold in our hands. And then each of us was invited to toss one piece of candy into a basket in the center of the room. And then we were once again told to look at the candy in our hands and to see whether that collection of candy seemed smaller. And the difference was not noticeable. But what about the basket in the middle of the room? The basket that had been empty, well, that basket was now full of candy. Each of us contributed a little bit, but all of those little bits added up. And that candy could go to kids who didn't have any candy at all. The positive impact on those kids was far greater than any perceived cost of candy on our ends. And we still, by the way, I assure you, had plenty of candy left to rot our teeth or to make us a lot more hyper than our parents probably would have preferred us to be. And then we got to the real kicker. While some of us indeed focused on the piece of candy that we no longer had, and we felt sad about that, we were taught instead to focus on the joy that that piece of candy would bring to a child who didn't have any candy at all. That one piece of candy could be more impactful for that child than 10 or more pieces of candy could be for us. After all, while we might not have candy anytime we wanted, we could get candy, let's be honest, more often than we probably needed to have it. And I will never forget the moment my parents received a letter in the mail with no return address on it. It was a difficult time in our family's life. My mother had been laid off from her high-paying nursing job, and our family's income was essentially slashed in half. And paying tuition for 3 children at a parochial school was one of the first things that my parents decided was simply too much to afford. And days after initiating the paperwork to have the 3 of us transferred to public schools midway through the school year, my dad opened this anonymous, handwritten letter. And the letter said, "Your children are part of the St. Mary's family. Sometimes times get tough. Please rest assured their tuition expenses have been paid in full for the next 2 academic years." And this assured that I would be able to graduate from 8th grade at St. Mary's. It was one of the few times I ever saw my father weep. It was special. My family had been the recipient of grace and blessings. Why? Because others in the community recognized the need and stepped up. And I'll never know exactly how great of an impact that letter was, but I can tell you I'm graduated from St. Mary's, and I'm standing before you today as a priest who continued to study at faith-based institutions, a priest who wouldn't want to do anything else with his life than serving as a minister of God. And our parable today is about precisely this. You know, sometimes we hear people say that money is the root of all evil, and that's just not the case. That doesn't come from Scripture. Their misquoting is something that comes from the first letter to Timothy, where the author writes, "The love of money is the root of all evil." And Jesus, in today's gospel, teaches us something kind of similar to that. Jesus doesn't say that those who have possessions are evil. He says it's greed that's evil. The man in the parable that Jesus tells wants to hoard his wealth. And in this case, it's in the form of excess food. It's far more food than he could possibly need or even want. And instead of sharing this food, he wants to tear down his barn and build a bigger barn. And the food's going to go to waste. What good is all that food if it's just stored in a barn? He's essentially told, you can't take it with you, and yet you could have shared abundantly with others. Former Archbishop of Canterbury, William Temple, was famous for having said that the Christian church is the only organization that exists solely for the benefit of those who are not its members. And the church, contrary to what people on the internet might want you to think, doesn't generate income of its own. The church relies exclusively on the generosity of the community. And that means that things like the electric bill and the water bill and the landscaping and the salaries of the employees and the bread and the wine that we share during communion and the bulletins and books in your hands and the hangings that adorn the walls and the altar, everything is paid for and funded by the generosity of people who recognize that the church exists for a larger cause. You see, a theology of stewardship teaches us that we contribute to the church not out of obligation, but out of gratitude. And we contribute not because we think the priest is a cool guy, or not because we think maybe the priest isn't a cool guy, but because we're grateful for a spiritual home that does so much for so many people. I'll be fully transparent with you. Our dollars this year are down year to date. And guess what? They're down through no fault of our own. They're down primarily because some of our generous donors and parishioners have died, and others have moved out of state. Now, it's true that some people have decided to attend church in a different church in town, but those contributions actually represent a kind of negligible percentage of that deficit. The bulk of that deficit is due to death and geographic location, which makes it even more complex because we're also, as a community, grieving the loss of those people who are no longer here with us. But guess what? We also have an influx of visitors and new members over the course of that same time span. People who continue to discover that St. John's is a terrific and wonderful place, full of love and of light and of joy. And people who recognize that St. John's is here not for our members, but for those who are not yet our members, or perhaps those who will never be our members. Two of those people have made the conscious decision to become baptized into our community today. Why? Because they recognize the goodness that is here, the goodness of the Lord, the goodness of you as a worshiping community. If you read my pastoral reflection this week, then you know that all ministry stems from our baptism. That same baptism that Anastasia and Jaime here will share with us today and then for the rest of their lives. And in that baptismal covenant, we affirm that we will seek and serve Christ in all persons, and that we will strive for justice and peace among all people, and respect the dignity of every human being. Caring for this place is part of our shared covenant, and it's up to us to remember that God provides. Now, maybe some of us have hit a time of difficulty in our lives. Finances are tough for a lot of people right now. And if that's the case, then please do not put yourself in a place of hardship. And in fact, I want you to know that the church is here. It's here to support you. It's here to help you whenever possible. And for others, maybe it's not a bad idea to reflect on the blessings we do have and to determine whether we can afford an extra piece of candy or two at this halfway point in the year. Our ministries help a lot of people. Our veterans ministry on Friday fed close to 100 people. Our ministries help us to live into our baptismal covenant. And at the same time, they cost funds to operate. As our collect prayer says today, we acknowledge that the church depends on the protection of God, a God who is good and who is loving and who is just, and a God who has blessed us as a community abundantly. In a few moments, we will renew our baptismal covenant, and today we will welcome 2 new members into the fullness of Christ's Holy Catholic Church, who are making that decision to declare that same covenant and their desire to live into it. So when we do that, let's each of us reflect on the words we say, acknowledging the blessings we have in life and the gratitude we feel for the times others have been gracious with us. All that we have in life is a gift from God, And what good does it do to hoard our blessings? Isn't it such a better feeling to share our blessings? I know that it sure felt good when my tuition was paid for by those anonymous donors. But imagine how good those anonymous donors felt, knowing the impact of their generosity. It probably changed them more than it changed me. And that's the message of today's gospel. Caring for our neighbors and being good stewards certainly helps others. But the greater impact is that it helps us to grow in faith and love. Let's ask ourselves, are we ready and willing to grow in faith and in love? And if so, how can we continue to enhance our commitment to this place that exists not only for us, but for those who are not our members? Amen.